Don't mind me, just trying to find my mark. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Zaida, and this is Read Books Get Lit. I'm very excited that you're here today because I'm starting a brand new series, the first series on this channel, actually. And this is going to take a deep dive into some of the books that made me the reader that I am today. And not just who I am as a reader, but also who I am as a person. So I've broken it up into three different parts, and in my mind, it makes sense to start off with some of the books from my childhood that had a very strong, lasting impression on me, books that I still think about very fondly today, even as an adult. So let's get right into it. A little disclaimer before we start. So, I actually don't have most of the copies on my list. Some of them might be in storage back home, but I have a good feeling that most of them are kind of just lost to the universe at this point in time. But I do have two of the books with me. The first one you might have seen if you caught my previous video. I did a booktube newbie tag video. I basically talk a little bit about who I am as a reader, what I like to read, all that good stuff. So if you're interested, definitely go check that out. But I wanted to bring this book back because it is very much a part of my childhood and sort of my reading journey from a very young age. And that book is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. This really was a fundamental book in my childhood. I didn't own this copy until I was an adult, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's like a sticker and it says coming 10/18 of 2016. So that's the year that I got this book. I did not have it as a child, but borrowed it nonstop from the library for years. And this, I feel like, was really one of the books that I started to read by myself on my own, where I didn't need my sister or my grandparents or parents to sort of read along with me. So this book holds a very special place in my heart as sort of the jump start into my journey as a reader. Another book that I borrowed nonstop from the library as a kid was In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories. I mentioned this in my BookTube newbie tag video as well, and this is basically a collection, an anthology of spooky stories. My mom would read this to me as a kid, and she used to do these monster, scary, creepy voices when she read it to me. And I really liked that. It was, sort of tapping into that imagination, creative, make believe world. And I just latched onto that. I grew up loving scary stories, spooky movies, and that is a trait that has stuck with me since then. Another book that was pretty foundational for me was Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. I have a very clear image in my head of that bright pink cover with the neon greens and oranges. I think it was a palm tree. It might have been a coconut tree. One of those types of trees. But that was on the cover. And I I used to read that and sort of sing song the story out loud, which makes sense. Kids respond really well to music and sound and rhythm. And the whole thing's written in rhyme, which is good and bad. I have a love-hate relationship with rhyme. I Sometimes it bothers me, and then other times I'm cast in a play that is written entirely in rhyme. And that's how it goes sometimes. That was almost a rhyme. Good God. Okay, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the next book you probably haven't heard of, which is totally okay. That's what I'm here for, bring in some diversity to the booktube space. But I definitely wanted to share this book. It's called Urashimo Taro. It is based on a Japanese folk story. This reminds me of my grandma. I'm part Japanese, grew up in a Japanese household, and she would read this book to my sister and I when we were kids. This cover with Urashimo Taro on the back of the turtle is forever ingrained in my memory. So this book, it's based off of a very old story, and the main character, Urashima, he does a good deed. he saves this turtle, and as a reward, the turtle takes him to this underwater kingdom where he thinks that he's, just there for a couple of hours. But in actuality, he's been there for something like 100 years. And this story, it's very much, if you're Japanese, if you grew up in a Japanese community, there's a good chance that you heard of this or even read this exact book when you were a kid. What's really cool is that just a few months ago, my friend, shout out to Sean, hey Sean, he actually wrote a short play that is based on this story. And he invited me and asked me to do a staged reading for said play, which was very fun. It definitely gave me the feels and, took me back to my childhood. I thought a lot about my grandma. But that's kind of the cool thing about stories, and especially stories we read as a kid. It takes us back to a very special place. And so this book, it has stuck with me. There's something about Roald Dahl books that just hit home for kids. I mean, they have everything. They have likable characters, they have fun adventures and action, there's drama and conflict, you know, wild settings, really interesting character relationships. And my favorite of all of his books was The BFG. Loved, loved, loved this book so much. Borrowed it all the time from the library. It was a hardcover with that plastic covering over it that always made a crinkly noise whenever you opened the book. Remember that? And I I really think that I can credit it back to the BFG as to why, as I got older, I really like stories with unlikely companions. Because Sophie is this tiny little girl, and the BFG, well, he is a literal giant. And despite this obvious difference in who they are as people and characters, they form this bond and this connection. They go on an adventure together. And, they have a lifelong friendship after. That's what I'm assuming happens post BFG. But that story is probably why I like those unlikely friendships and relationships and bonds in other books and movies and TV shows. It's just fun because it's unpredictable. And you're always kind of curious, like, okay, well, are they going to get along? Okay, they get along. But how? How is this relationship going to build? So, yeah, thank you, Roald Dahl. I appreciate that. This next book technically wasn't my book, and I don't actually think I've read it cover to cover, but it is very much a part of my childhood. I have a very distinct visual memory of this book around our house, and it was my sister's book. It was Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. Silverstein? Silverstein. One of those. It's basically a book of poetry, and it covers a bunch of different topics. Some of them, people would say, are a little too mature or serious for kids, but I would argue that kids can take on a lot more than we give them credit for. And the titular poem, which is at the very end, I believe it's the last poem in the book, Where the Sidewalk Ends, that, reading it as an adult, I interpret that as sort of, as a kid, you are facing the end of your childhood, and you're acknowledging that this is where the sidewalk ends. And beyond that, well, it's a mystery. It's an adventure. We'll see when we get there, type of thing. So it's really interesting to kind of look back on kid stories and books like this, because there's a lot of, serious, mature themes and ideas and concepts, but hidden within the, you know, illustrations and rhyming stanzas of a kid's book. Very clever writers. Very clever. All right, so the next set of books, they're actually series books, and they are all pretty defining of the time period in which they were published. If you were a kid in in the late 80s into the 90s. There's a good chance that you read these books. Fun fact, all of these books, these series, they had a TV show tie in, which was great for me because I have always been a TV and a movie junkie since I was a child. So that was a perfect blend. So, yes, I have four to tell you about. Can you guess what they are? All right, the first series in the lineup is Animorphs. Guys, how cool would it have been if you had the ability to morph and transform yourself into an animal? Like I loved dolphins for many many years. That was my favorite animal all throughout elementary school. And I so desperately wanted to be able to change into a dolphin so I could swim in the ocean, mostly because I'm a very bad swimmer and I don't like the deep ocean. Ironic that I grew up on an island. I think most kids would love the ability to have some sort of transformation power or superpower in general. And being able to shapeshift into an animal, that's a good place to start. So, definitely had books all over the house. Yes, technically they were my sister's books, but I did read them. We watched the show as well. Overall, 5 out of 5. That is very iconic for my childhood. If you grew up in the 90s, there's a pretty good chance that you read at least one Goosebumps book, right? I mean, those books, they were everywhere. They were at every single book fair. They were always borrowed out from the library, which is probably why we ended up buying them because we just couldn't borrow them from the library ourselves. I feel like Goosebumps was in a dark, dark room, but on a slightly older level as far as, kid audience range goes, which worked out great. Again, always into the spooky and the scary. I think that this was also, as far as like kid friendly level, this was a very consistent way of diving into the monster of the week framework. And that I think is a solid approach to this type of like anthology, basically. The books were super fun. The covers, the illustrations, I mean, very brightly covered, but also some of the illustrations and the artwork, they were kind of scary if you were a little kid reading them. So, another one, 5 out of 5. Love me some Goosebumps. Good work, R.L. Stine. Good work. This list would not be complete unless I included the next series. So I have to mention, I just have to, The Adventures of Mary Kate and Ashley. Yo, you have no idea. You have no clue how big of an MK&A fan I was as a kid. And actually, well into my adolescent years as well. I swear. Anything that they did, anything, every TV show, every movie, every book series, I had their journal, I had their hair accessories. I was, and I still am, a Mary Kate and Ashley fan. And technically, they had two different book series. They had the original, The Adventures of Mary Kate and Ashley, and then they had the New Adventures of Mary Kate and Ashley. They're a little bit older. It was like, post Two of a kind of going a little bit further into the So Little Time era. But they had two different book series. I swear to God, I had every single one of them. Every single one of them. They are iconic. I love them so much. Mary Kate and Ashley, forever and always. The last series that I want to mention on my list is probably one of my favorites from my childhood, and that is Wishbone. I loved this little dog so, so much. I'm positive that Wishbone is the sole reason why, as a 9 or 10-year-old, I had any sort of understanding of these classic pieces of literature. I mean, they covered stories like Count of Monte Cristo, Three Musketeers, Prince and the Pauper, Romeo and Juliet. As a 10-year-old, I had no business knowing about those stories, but thanks to Wishbone, the TV show, and the book series, I I got to experience and learn about these, very loved famous, well-written pieces of literature. Like they're I owe it to Wishbone. That little dog, owe it all to him. That's a wrap on today's first installment of this new series, The Books That Made Me. We're going to come back next time and talk about some middle grade and young adult books that left a lasting impression on me, followed by the third video, which will be all about the adult fiction stories that made me the reader that I am today. If you read, liked, or even loved some of the books that I mentioned in today's video, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to geek out about some of our favorite books from our childhood together. If there was at least one thing that you enjoyed or liked about this video, definitely give it a thumbs up and please consider subscribing. It can really help my channel grow and I would very much appreciate the support. I think that's it for now. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and I will see you in the next video. Until next time, bye.